A very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention. I was lucky enough to attend the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank in Marrakesh, Morocco. And one of the recurring themes that came throughout the discussions that were there was the need for the private sector to take the lead role in revitalizing growth across the African continent. And the reasons given, and I think all of us know it, Minister Manuel, again, I'm stuck in my ministers, referred to the indebtedness of African countries. I think IMF figures show that more than half of Africa's countries are sitting above the recommended 55% debt to GDP ratio that the IMF wants. And so there's limited fiscal space. But that's not the only problem. The other problem is that, of course, that debt is becoming expensive because of the US fight against inflation. So governments have limited room to be leading the recovery of the African economies. We need the private sector to step up. So what needs to be done? That's my panel today. Thank you for joining us, and let's get cracking. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Nene, because you wear two hats. You, of course, are an African. You're an internal participant, but you also interact with foreign investors to the continent. So let me get your main message in terms of critical things to consider for an investor who's looking at this opportunity on the African continent thinking, how do I come in?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And indeed, if you have two hats, you take off the other one in order to wear the other one. So you can't wear them at the same time. So allow me to take off the other one, and perhaps I'll put it on if you allow me as the time goes on. But I think perhaps let's put your question into context to look at because my brief here was to try and share my views on the on doing business in Africa during this time. And you've mentioned one of the challenges that we have with regards to the triple deficits that we are faced with. But some clever people have even coined an acronym, which is VUCA, which says we live in periods of extreme volatility, high uncertainty, intense complexity, and unprecedented ambiguity. In order to address this, I mean, it's always good to actually formulate finding a solution by looking at what are the challenges. Because behind every challenge is, I'm told, is an opportunity. And I think this is what we always try. Even in my role at the European House Ambrosetti, it has always been looking at what are the challenges, but in looking at the challenges and the networks that we have, in engagements that we have, looking for opportunities and then finding solutions. So our challenges are actually, and we are actually joined at the hip as the continent and the region, but also I think we stand at a fortunate position to have a relationship with people outside of our borders in the European House Ambrosetti. So in finding those solutions, I think it helps to learn lessons from where they are. One of the challenges that I think have been identified as being of critical importance is, our logistics infrastructure. The second one being the issue of infrastructure in connectivity. And then also the issue of the energy crisis. And if you look at most of the companies and the heads of industry that are here, they come from those sectors that are focusing on those infrastructures. And it is for that reason that presents an opportunity. Whilst it is challenges, but it's an opportunity to begin to look at how we unlock those potential bottlenecks that are presented by our rail and ports, presented by lack of connectivity, but also not being able to trade amongst ourselves because we don't have market intelligence to be able to understand what the needs of each of our countries individually in order for us to be able to address that.
Yeah. So you speak about them, their challenges, but at the same time you are saying there are also opportunities. So I wanted to know from your perspective, do you think the policymakers are framing these challenges in the correct way to enable the private sector to be able to come and take advantage and turn them into opportunities?
I think that is where these dialogues become critical. Because without the private sector understanding what government's challenges and constraints are, and also the public sector understanding that, well, there are some policies I would understand, well, all of them, and, with good intentions, but unless they are socialized between, the private and the public sector, they're not worth the paper written on.
Yeah.
And it's for that reason that I think we've taken very limited advantage of even the existing frameworks like our AFCFTA and all the other dialogues that are in place.
Yeah. Saki, you work in the space, of course, where you are working hard to try to provide the policy that the private sector requires for them to be able to try and take advantage of these opportunities that we're talking about. I want to open in thoughts in respect to the measures that we need to enable the private sector to be active and take advantage of this, and then, of course, the extent to which those efforts are being successful. And I'm really asking you here to take a critical look in the mirror.
Sure. No, thank you, Godfrey, and good morning to everyone. Well, I guess to put context into this, I'll start with a quote. There's a philosopher who said, philosophers have analyzed the world, however, the point is to change it. And I think starting with the questions that the chairman of Old Mutual raised on, in these trade initiatives, what is the benefit? We are the biggest economy in the country, and therefore a lot of the trade that happens with the EU, where a lot of it is automotive, some of the mining commodities and others, a lot of it comes actually from Gauteng. And the big question is how much of it benefits small businesses and how much of it benefits South African businesses. And we've seen, for example, in the automotive sector, where part of the challenges are that the OEMs have international supply chains, so a lot of the decisions are actually not made locally. So one of the things that has happened is actually there's an automotive deal that has happened as a result of these engagements. But what we have to show in that is that there actually are South African suppliers that benefit out of it, and there also are SMEs that benefit out of it. Some of it has to do with complying with EU regulations, because that's what they have to do, but there has to be a conscious effort, especially in the automotive sector, which is hugely subsidized by government. South African government pays tens of billions of dollars, so we have been focused on what can be done to get more component manufacturers that are local and do a bit of training. So we have incubation programs that are doing that. But we've also signed an agreement out of this with Ambrosetti, where again some of these initiatives are taking place. We've had exchanges of students because, again, it's got to be ground up. So if you want people who have the skills that are required in some of these fields, a bit of training is needed. So what we're really pleading on the businesses that are here is that, one, we're a partner for them in resolving whether it's the TTIC regulatory issues, them coming to set up in South Africa, them looking for partners that we can do. But they've got to be alive to the reality that equitable share of this trade is important if it's got to have the economic development imperatives we want.
I want to follow up at two levels. One, I want to follow up on your issue around trying to make sure that small businesses are part of the solution, but tie that to the challenge around that, the cost of compliance and the cost of coming together with perhaps people whose profile or whose capabilities are not at the same level as the investor who is coming in. I want to know how you're solving that problem. And then at the same time, I wanted to tie you into a comment that was made yesterday by Minister Sihle Zikalala in London. He was talking to infrastructure investors at a conference, and one of the issues that was raised was, number one, the cost of compliance again, and I think maybe we need to address this one really as solidly as you can. And then secondly, the other issue was around government bureaucracy, and I'm going to leave limit to Gauteng and ask the question, to what extent are you guys becoming as efficient as the guy next door?
Well, I mean, I think it's often an unfair question because it is raised when it is SMEs about the cost of doing business and how much of it government is coming to the party. But as I'm saying, if you look at the automotive sector, these are large corporates, we pay tens of billions to make it viable for them to operate in South Africa. So I think the issue about profitability and subsidy is not just an issue for small businesses. Even a lot of corporates actually benefit a lot out of it. It's the same thing if a big corporate can go around the bureaucracy. There is no reason why an entrepreneur who's small cannot. But what often makes it not commercially viable for them is because they don't have the income and the revenue. So you give somebody a $200 million contract, they will build the systems to be able to meet whatever the requirements are. So I think what we've got to resolve is the problem for them to be commercially viable. So in the same way as the big OEMs have had support, there's various supports for small businesses. So we can cover their cost of compliance. I mean, TTI has export readiness programs, and there's many of those that exist. So I don't think it's a bureaucracy issue. Otherwise, if that was a big problem, we wouldn't be exporting X3 and the Ford Ranger and many others. So business is doable, and that's why you have people in this room. But for smaller businesses, it's whether or not you give them the market, and I think that's what's got to be done. They must be given the opportunities, and then we are there to close the gap. It can be training, it can be that they need infrastructure. It's done and can be done. I mean, Ford has set up for the Ford Ranger, and government came to the party. They put in bulk infrastructure in Silverton and many other support mechanisms which were required for it. So I don't think it's a very unique thing to SMEs. It's whether there's willingness for us to get them.
Thanks, Saki. Stavros, if I can ask you to come in. Of course, Aspen, we know, is an international business now built from here, navigating this environment. So perhaps you can share your experience in terms of navigating some of these challenges.
Godfrey, firstly, may I thank the organizers, House of Ambrosetti, and of course CNBC Africa and all the other colleagues, ambassadors and other colleagues present. Let me preface my response by mentioning that there are significant geopolitical headwinds right now that need to be factored in any conversation. And what's apparent is that Africa was the slowest to recover from COVID. The reasons are obvious. They manifest because Africa simply doesn't have the infrastructure, the logistics, supply chain, and neither does it have the manufacturing capacity and capability. Now, as Aspen, we distribute our products throughout the entire continent virtually. We have manufacturing facilities in Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, and of course a number of factories here in South Africa. And the lessons that need to be learned moving forward and why Africa still is an attractive prospect is the following, Godfrey. Firstly, we still have a young population, and by 2040, our population would have doubled on this continent, so it will be closer to a market of 2.5 billion, and mainly young consumers, young tech-savvy consumers, I might add. The second thing here is that COVID has reawoken Africa in a sense that there's a realization that we need to draw in partners that will help beneficiate products. So I think it's a tired cliche by now saying, well, we're the nursery of raw material supplies to the rest of the world, and I couldn't help but have a bit of a laugh when Alec Irwin came up, because he's been saying for years, you know, you export iron ore. And Trevor Manuel, the same thing when they were in cabinet. You export iron ore at $100 a ton, and then you import a cell phone that's got 1 microgram at 20 times the price. Right? So I think COVID has brought home the realization that this is the time to start beneficiating on the continent. Otherwise, the next global event that happens, and arguably we're in the midst of one right now, Africa will be the slowest again to recover economically. Now, my third and final point is, let me look very much at an Aspen perspective here. So how have we found business on the continent? I've given you a sense of our footprint. To be frank, it's a mixed bag. And some economies on the continent are more fiscally constrained than others. But I've never met a pessimist that's been a successful businessman ever. And I've also never met a pessimist that has solved a business problem. So we have to look at this on the basis of, yes, it is a mixed bag, but I think it presents frontiers of opportunity that very little, if any, other geographies provide in the medium to long term. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stavros. I think it was it Minister Patel who said we don't want to export rocks? I think it was said at the recent AGOA forum. And I think it's an important...
20 years ago.
You also said... Thank you. So the point, I think, is well made. We need to be doing things. We need to be making things. So let me go to our visitors and ask the question. And I'm going to start, first of all, with Francesco. I want, obviously, your observations in terms of doing business on the continent, the kind of obstacles that you face. We've raised some of them here. And whether when people say to you, Africa, you see the opportunities people so often speak about. I think there was a Google executive last week who was saying by 2050, I think the studies are showing that 1 in 3 workers will be from the continent, which makes it exciting. But are you excited when we talk about the continent?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you to Ambrosetti for organizing this very interesting session. Obviously, we are very interested in South Africa, and we are not yet operating in the country, but I would like to give you my perspective of why we believe to invest in South Africa is a huge opportunity. First of all, as a matter of fact, the Global Attractiveness Index ranks South Africa as the #1 country in terms of investment opportunity. And secondly, we believe it's a very attractive market because we believe that South Africa is a gateway for a larger, area for, let's say, to reach, more than 1.3 billion people in 54 different countries. And we also believe that South Africa is ripe for digital evolution. It's already very active in the continent with 80 technological hubs. And we believe that the digital evolution can really accelerate the growth of the productivity of the country. It can create, more than 1 million jobs in the next 5 years. And in addition to that, when we look at our industry, we believe that the national lottery in South Africa is a huge opportunity. First of all, because since the establishment in 2000, it has been, extremely popular, very relevant, reaching more than 80% of the population. And based on our assessment in 2022, the National Lottery raised more than 7 billion rands. It is a very relevant amount. But having said that, we still believe that there is a huge opportunity to further develop the National Lottery. And we believe that, based on our experience, we can create value coming to South Africa. If you look at the share of the National Lottery of the GDP is less than 0.1%. In more mature markets where we operate, like Italy, for instance, the National Lottery is 10 times the share of the GDP of South Africa. And when it comes to the National Lottery, we believe that, the National Lottery can be really a driving force to transform the society for good. And I would like also to explain what our approach will be to, let's say, establish our operation in South Africa. First of all, we believe that when it comes to National Lottery, one size doesn't fit all. So we believe National Lottery should be local, should be operated locally, and should benefit local people. So first of all, our distinctive, let's say, factor in terms of strategy to enter new markets has been to enter the market as a local player. And this means to establish very strong relations with all the relevant stakeholders. That is key to understand the market, to understand the culture, to understand the preferences of the customers, to understand technology, the distribution channels of the country. And once you understand then you are in a position to customize and to tailor a very effective proposition for the market. And this means to develop specific products for the market. We don't plan to take products from other countries and to launch them in South Africa. We want to develop products that are coherent, that fit with the values of the South African culture. And we plan to customize the technology, to customize the customer experience in order to be really a local player. And in addition to that, we believe that it's very important to invest in the country. So we will not only plan to establish operation in South Africa, but also to establish a technological hub that is part of our strategy, what we have done also in the other markets where we have developed our footprint, because we believe that technological hub will be key to customize the proposition for South Africa, but will also be an opportunity to provide additional contribution to our technology innovation in other markets. And it will be an opportunity to obviously create new jobs in the digital and technological areas, but it will be also an opportunity to invest in training to develop the digital and technological competences that are key for the evolution of the market.
About regulation, but I'm going to park that question because that question has been asked often enough, and I think we know that's one of the challenges for companies that are trying to come into a new market, especially in your industry. Danilo, if I can come to you, your thoughts, it's the same question really. We want your impressions of what you think about when you hear about people speak about opportunities, but also at the same time you look at the problems that we have. Okay, there are opportunities, but there are problems. The problems that we have in terms of executing that strategy for you to be successful.
Yes, thank you to everybody. Yes, I'm in agreement. Africa is a big country with a big opportunity, with a big market, with the big raw materials. And this is the way also to get now this opportunity in place. Means that it is very important that Danieli and Africa will develop their opportunities by themselves, growing up and create added value and GDP. Okay, this is very important.
Yeah. What about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? So I think Stavros said it's a mixed bag. It's 55 territories. But we're trying to standardize that. Does the FTA offer the kind of solution that you think will enable companies such as yours to try to navigate the very different terrains that you find across the continent?
Yes, of course. Danieli is in the metals industry, okay? Metal industry is making a lot of develop in order to become as much as possible green steel. Okay? Green steel is based on hydrogen technology, and in my opinion, Africa has a lot of opportunities in terms of solar and cogeneration to produce hydrogen, to go to produce green steel.
What would make it easier if I were to ask you just two things that you think if you were to speaking to policymakers in this room, you would like them to address to make it easier for you to be able to invest? Be frank, please, if you can.
Important is the availability of financing to our clients. This is very important. And the second is, especially in some countries in Africa, to be easy in the bureaucracy. These are the two important targets to be achieved to develop the business.
Yeah. If I can come to you, Mr. Nene, and pick up, if you like, any of the points that you might want to emphasize or perhaps disagree with that have been raised by the others. But I wanted to come to the localization issue because we know it's an important one, especially in the context of inclusive growth, an important conversation on the continent, given our history. Is it, in your view, being handled correctly in terms of the incentives that are being offered and the packages that are being put in place to enable, one, the inclusion of the small businesses that we're talking about, but also at the same time to enable those with capital and who see the opportunities to come in and exploit those opportunities?
I think what we need is an environment where there is full understanding of the issues from both sides. from both the public and the private sector, and it is this kind of relationship that, we try to emphasize as much as possible, to find the symbiotic relationship between the public and the private sector.
Right.
Because where the two merge, that is where we find the solution. And at the end of the day, our mandates might be slightly different. For instance, the mandate of the public sector would be to look after the interests of, the social interest of its people.
Yeah.
Whilst perhaps the private sector would be focusing more on, on returns on investment.
Yes.
And now finding the right balance between the two becomes a bit tricky. But Mr. Manuel here will tell you that in drafting what we called the National Development Plan, at the center of it were very two striking features of making, of doing business cheap and reducing the cost of living.
Of doing business,
The cost of living for the individuals down there.
Sure.
But reduce the cost of doing business whilst you reduce also, the cost of living for the people on the so finding that, a balance is one of those tricky ones. But it's not an insurmountable challenge, because all it needs is for us to have an understanding that in order for business to operate, it needs to operate in an environment where its citizens, where the citizens of that country are able to afford the services that business supplies. But at the same time, where the citizens also have an incentive to participate, and not only as employees, but also in the process of creating the wealth that we all need. And I would imagine that institutions like the one that we have in Gauteng are critical, because that's where you create an environment or a meeting point of these two sort of competing mandates.
Saki, you want to come in?
For me, I think a lot of them, especially around the Africa Free Trade Area Act, have been mentioned. One is infrastructure, whether it's maintenance of existing infrastructure or creating infrastructure. If you're going to trade in the continent, goods must be able to move. The ports must work, there must be roads, there must be electricity. So infrastructure is the first base. The second one is then standards and rules. So if you have a product here, Stavros has to comply with regulations in 55 countries to be able to export, it complicates it, because each country has its own regulation. The EU will have an EU standard for automotive, and I think that's the next thing that needs to be done. And then the other one is financing, which has been mentioned. And with it, often it's just settlement systems and payment systems and currencies. If you have multiple currencies, multiple regulations on banks, makes it difficult, one, to raise money, but even if you've made money, getting money out of the country. We have certain countries in the continent where Forex is an issue. So you invest, and then you get questions about how you're going to get the money. There's quotas so those are, I think, are the basic things that have to be done and resolved very fast to get into it. But as I said initially, I think the red tape issues get dramatized a lot. They are a pain and they are a problem, but I think if we created a market for these businesses, for them to operate, those become secondary. You can resolve them when there's an incentive for them to be done. But you can give all the incentives you want to an SME. If they have no market to sell to, it is then exercise in futility.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll come back to you, Francisco, because I asked you the question around regulation and to what extent you found regulation a challenge in the different African markets that we're looking at.
We believe that regulation, honestly, when it comes to national lottery, is best practice. National lottery has been established 23 years ago in South Africa. And as far as I'm aware, I think it's the only country where every time there's been a tender, the license has been awarded to a new bidder. And this is a testament of how competitive the tender process is. And we believe that it's really a benchmarking exercise compared to other countries. And also the regulation, I fully understand that no country has a perfect regulation. Well, we believe that the regulatory framework of South Africa, when it comes to national lottery, is absolutely very, very solid. And we also believe that, the way the national lottery has been established is absolutely, very effective, because there is a very strong bond between national lottery and good causes. And the reason why the national lottery exists is to provide funding to good causes. And this means to be in a position to support new initiatives in the fields of education, of care, social programs. So we believe that this is really, a best practice at the global level.
Sure. Stavros, your experience? And perhaps the question whether AFC FTA makes a difference.
Godfrey, just before I answer your question, I need to make a very important point about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, right? And it kind of segues into your question anyway. The single biggest opportunity with the FTA is that you now for the first time start aggregating markets in Africa. So, as I said, it's a mixed bag. It's the most heterogeneous continent anywhere in the world. And yet, we were always perceived to be one single market, one single monolithic market. And that's why we failed during COVID, because we were disaggregated, didn't have size, scale, or economies of scale. So this, for the first time, starts to aggregate the volumes. And therein lies the biggest opportunity, I believe.
Sure.
Now, what is my experience in dealing with Africa? And I've traveled, I've traversed Africa far and wide. The single biggest challenge for me, aside from the fiscal constraints, of course, is infrastructure and logistics. So we can talk about administrative burden, we can talk about all the other areas that colleagues have mentioned. But the single biggest challenge for me is supply chain, infrastructure, and an efficient supply chain will change the dynamic so much on the continent. But you can only get that, as I said earlier, if you start beneficiating on the continent. And that is a critical conversation. And Africa seeks partners that are going to partner it in beneficiating on the continent.
I think it's a question we can put to Saki, because it's a question I've been asking as well. We speak about these supply chains across the continent, but are we putting in place the building blocks to enable the creation of such supply chains? I mean, we speak about the automotive industry as an example. You have got Kenya making cars, you have got Morocco making cars, you have South Africa making cars, but there is no part that's being made in South Africa that's going into Kenya. How do we do that? Where do we begin? Is it the regional economic blocks?
Thanks, Godfrey. Again, back to the three things I mentioned. I agree with Stavros, the infrastructure. But if you break down what this infrastructure and the supply chain means, if you're taking something, let's take just SADC as an example. And in SADC you have SACU, where there's a customs union. So in dealing with Namibia, Botswana, Swaziland, it's a little easier. Similar currency, similar monetary policy, payment systems are a lot more complicated. But at times the border is a problem. It takes 4 days for a truck to get through the border because customs are different. The one country wants money, the other ones, and just the whole processing. So if it's going to take you days of somebody who's getting paid in a truck to sleep and do nothing, because of inefficiencies in borders, it increases the cost of doing business. If rail network doesn't work, there's rail infrastructure between South Africa and Mozambique, which partly has helped with, commodities when, we had efficiencies with Transnet. But now you're having a lot of that cargo getting into the roads, so it puts more strain on roads and the road network for it to work. So a lot of that, those supply chain systems, for them to work, it's harmonizing the customs regimes, harmonizing the standards, because you now get a good where somebody says, well, it must comply with the standard for it to get into my country. Again, it adds into the time that it's going to take. So there's been in different parts of the continent differing levels of dealing with infrastructure. I think East Africa has done fairly well.
I was actually going to say the same,
If you look at, what Tanzania, Kenya have done, and also,
leapfrogging the oldest customs union in the world.
SACU. So there's been, and they've done even small things like no roaming charges.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, it has lifted revenues in the region because now people can make more calls. It's easier to do quite a lot of things. So it's those details that we've got to sort out to make these things work more practically than, at a grand scale. But as Nhlanhla said, there are these organizations like Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, TTIC, that are meant to do this. But the Africa Free Trade Area Act, for it to be practical, they've got to force governments into it, and maybe through regional blocs and what Afrexim Bank is doing to incentivize and pay for some of them. But it is resolving really those nuts and bolts issues.
Sure. So we are making progress, but we're not making the progress that we need. We need more scale, right? I've been authorized to open the debate to questions from the floor. If you have a question that you'd like to put to the panel. Is that a hand I see there, Francisco? Sorry? Was your hand up? No, you were just stroking your beard. Okay, got you. All right. I see a couple of hands here. Do we have a microphone, or do they just speak from where they are? It looks like, no, there's a microphone around the house. If you can, please. So we've got about 10 minutes. So if we can fit as many questions as we can into those 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is Emmanuel Ansam Profi, participant from Ghana. My questions are on two. This is a great platform, but I also wanted to ask that how are we involving the young businesses and startup in this conversation? We need to tag them along so that the startup world will now know some of the basics and then see how the bottlenecks of navigating the business world between these two continents will actually be. That is one. Second, there's a large issue on logistics and infrastructure. I'll give you a critical example. I'm just flying in from Ghana. Someone needs shea butter to do a product here in South Africa and then make it use of it also. The cost per kilo of freight alone is more than the cost of the product. How can, and I'm glad we have a company like DHL here. How can DHL, South African Airways, that flies daily to Accra and other places, help in navigating this? If you put a blanket price on such things, we're never going to get there. We'll keep talking about this. How are we navigating this?
Got you. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that question. I think, Saki, do you want to take the the cost one? But I think the cost and the answers are there, right? The government is doing something about it. But what about the young people?
Well, again, I mean, for me, there's this Stavros wants to.
I can follow you if you wish.
Sure, no, go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, I'm really sorry to have jumped you here. That wasn't the intention. But Godfrey, the best way we can start including young people and SMEs, because I kind of see them as interchangeable, because young people are going to start somewhere and they're going to grow, is that until and unless we are serious as a continent about implementing localization policies. Because what localization policies do is they build an entire value chain, and you get backward and you get forward linkages. So if you take my sector, for example, so Aspen's the largest in Africa, one of the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, etc., etc. But we rely on the small guy down the road in Quebec, Port Elizabeth, to produce the packaging for us. We will rely on a pharmaceutical entrepreneur who sets up a laboratory or a testing facility to assist us with what we call bioequivalence testing. I won't get into that detail, but that's a small business. And that small business will land the Aspen contract and will grow from there, because this is all about giving small businesses, entrepreneurs, market access and economies of scale, because anything and everything we do on the continent must land economies of scale so that we can compete globally. We don't want an insular market here in Africa. We want our entrepreneurs to become globally competitive. Beneficiation is the key here.
You're coming?
Perhaps another angle with regards to youth. We always refer to our youth, depending on where you stand, we refer to our youth as our demographic dividend.
Yes,
Which
supposed
means
to be dividend.
It's supposed to be a dividend, but at the same time, when we look at our economies and the structure of our economies, the bulk of the unemployment falls on the youth. But the youth, by design, are not actually meant to be, labor waiting to be absorbed.
Yeah.
He made a very important point in asking his question with regards to startups. Sure. I think we need to create an environment that is conducive to allowing young people to actually come up with new ideas that would actually, because otherwise we're not going to grow economies by repeating the same thing all the time of trying to create employment. But we need to allow them space to be able to actually exercise, this free, environment, the innovation empowering. That comes with their youthfulness. Yeah. But where are those hubs where our youth are able to actually just come and explore that? Access to connectivity, access to, to the infrastructure that would allow them space to be able to do the research and then be able to actually come up with and think outside of the box.
Absolutely. It's almost like you read my mind. I used to be a young man once in the 1980s. I was. I swear to you. In Zimbabwe, as a young man, going into the late 80s, into the 90s, I felt emboldened enough to say, I want to quit my job, I want to go and start something. Yeah. What was the difference? The difference was the environment. Yeah. We need to create that environment. You're absolutely, absolutely right. Let's take some more questions. There's a question here. There's another one there. Oh, you have the microphone. But
can I just make one example quickly? Sorry, Bajan. When I talk also about creating an environment, I think we shouldn't also overthink the creation of an environment and also apportion it to a particular segment of society. One creative, I don't know whether I should mention which enterprise this is, but they've actually come up, they went to one of our institutions of higher learning, and they said, give us your best student, hasn't even graduated, give us your best student in marketing to come join us, because we want him, our business has grown to this level, but we want somebody now that is going to come up with something new. He came up with what we call the 60-60 today. That thing has actually grown. Sure. It's much bigger than Take a Lot today.
Wow.
This young man, it's a young man who hadn't even graduated from college. My apologies. I just thought perhaps when we think about it, I think we should be more practical, but also think of things that can actually work and where each one of us can be able to make a difference.
From where you
are. If you think you are too small, I was saying this morning talking to people, it means you haven't spent time in a room with a mosquito.
Thank you.
If you think you can't make a difference because you're small.
And we know what the mosquito can do. Yes, ma'am. Very quickly if you can.
My name is Glorious Kylie Hlangwenya, and I'm a born citizen of South Africa, born in Soweto. And I am an entrepreneur and a female mine owner. And I don't just own mine, I also have a few land trying to develop residential and other commercial spaces such as the smart city. And I can tell you the challenges that one faces daily is extremely devastating. It's all good sitting here hearing all these beautiful motivational things that are going to sound as though it's going to be effective tomorrow. But the doors that shut in our faces is extremely sad. Every time you go into business to business, you have to conform to either forefronting with another white face or an accent, just so you can be understood and heard. Now, what we want to do is bring our mining platforms to be in a platform that allow our communities, the disadvantaged numbers, to access investors that are international, because if I'm dealing with Samanco and Glencore, all the big giants, the Anglo-American, you name them, they've been in the sector for years. But everybody expects you to be forever starting somewhere in the benchmark where you must probably go and earn a stipend or 4,000 rand or something. I'm not sure whether you degreed or whatnot. And there are no sort of platforms or private sectors that are actually willing to bridge that gap, that say, let us help all the mining companies that have recently been permitted to be part and parcel of the sector in the true sense of the word, development and change, where the access to investment and the system itself does not contradict itself by allowing a Chinese guy or a guy from Dubai to come and buy the mineral without a system that is transferring what's sort of like a data that analyzes how the product gets exported and imported and so forth. But charity begins at home. Our own systems are opposing our existence. Okay. If I am mining as an illegal mining individual, it's a wrong thing, but I'm born right next to the mineral that tomorrow I need to ignore, but it's beneficial to the guy who's coming from China to come and buy. Okay. So to cut a long story short, I just want to know who is ready from the private sector who's going to be saying, we want to take the pledge and be available, and you don't have to be governmental stakeholder to be understood, so that we can also access the growth and impact of value of what we've studied for. We went to school to be educated. We went to get skills, but it's devastating what we go through. Okay. So I would like to know who's ready to take the pledge to bring transformation, so that the economic number is also uprooting our age gap, because we're not getting young.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think it's a comment, it's a cry. I will give you guys license to comment if you want. If no one wants.
No, well, I mean, you're right. Access to finance in South Africa is a bit difficult. I think more difficult than it should be. I mean, I've been a big proponent on the changes to Regulation 18 on investments of pension funds. I mean, we have deep capital markets here. If you look at how much is invested, or assets under management generally, if you put them in dollar terms, it's about $500 billion.
Substantial.
Take 1% of it and put it in real risk capital, that's where you're going to grow. I mean, South Africa underperforms its peers on greenfields and mining because there isn't a mining fund. ITC does fund, but they will say, we want you to have spent your own money first. Now, you have to drill, you have to do environment impact assessments, feasibilities that are bankable. Those are millions of rands. So it is true that there are those challenges in these institutions where there isn't as much money. But I'm happy it's Stavros who actually showed an example of what is possible with businesses that can do enterprise development, because that's what mitigates the risk. Sure. Because on the other side, I mean, South Africans are fairly conservative as a nation. You get these DFIs, one deal goes wrong, $1 billion is lost, people think it's corruption. They don't look at the portfolio. I mean, we have one institution which manages more than 2 trillion rands. Less than 1% of its book had the so-called governance issues. There was a big commission for years. They're not making decisions because there is a perception that when things go wrong, it's governance challenges, not that it's a portfolio. So that kind of thinking then, enforces conservatism on investors and funders who are meant to do this development. So point taken, but having said that, go to the institutions, apply, the compliance may be painful, but eventually the money is available.
Sure. Stavros?
Godfrey, look, I know you want to take a number of other questions. I'm not sure you're going to be able to now.
Go ahead quickly.
Hopefully through these responses we're answering some of the questions that haven't been asked, right?
Yes.
So, and I'm terribly sorry I'm beating this localization drum so hard today, but I listened to the frustrations of the lady, and she's quite right. And to be a black entrepreneur in South Africa is extremely complex and difficult. And access to capital is almost impossible, because you go even to a DFI, you go there and say, I need R1 million. Might not be a lot of money, R500,000, whatever it is, and then your first question is, where's your collateral? Well, obviously starting off, you don't have a collateral. Okay, so you don't have a collateral. Do you have an offtake? Of course you don't have an offtake, right? So we need to be smart about how we orientate and implement our local procurement or preferential procurement. It's really sad that we don't have preferential procurement framework regulations as we sit here right now. They were contested and all the rest of it. And I look at what our peer countries do, and they do it very differently. And we need to bridge that gap immediately. Because if you apply that smartly in a country, and you go to entrepreneurs and say, well, here are the off-takes. We'll give you a 5-year contract provided you meet conditions A, B, and C, and you're actually an operator from that sector and you're not fronting.
Sure.
Okay? That will give off-takes. Now, you create 150 to 200,000 entrepreneurs through partnerships in our country, you'll solve the unemployment crisis.
Sure.
But we need partners from Europe and elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's the underlining point.
Absolutely. And we need to be creative with the money that we have, which is available. We just need to be smart about it. Let's take some more questions. There's a gentleman here. Yes, sir.
Right. So,
They're two at the same time. Oh, okay. Let's give the gentleman who's standing up the microphone, and then we can go to. Oh. Yes, go ahead.
Is the mic on? My name is Charles Stride. I was Special Advisor to the Minister of Finance, first Chris Liebenberg and then Trevor. The gorilla in the room is partly in the...
Just lift the microphone a little bit. Yeah,
The gorilla in the room is partly the business community. And let me tell you, there can never be a business without a customer. And what we've done in South Africa is we killed the customer. In 1995, it was my suggestion to put a thing called Inland Revenue and Customs together to create SARS. We collected 50% of our tax from corporates and 50% from individuals. Today, we collect 20% from corporates and 80% from individuals. Now I come along and I've tried to publish a book, but because I'm so critical of the business community, and I come out of that community, it won't get published. But let me give you an example. We've got a gentleman from a pharmaceutical company. When I was in practice, the first increase in the price of propane was to 5 Rand 100 retail. You buy 100 propane today, it's 250 Rand per 100. You go and look at banks. Accountancy is my game. Go and look at every single major group and look at their margins since 1994 to date. I have. Just take Standard Bank. I know I bank with them, and I know they'll get upset. In 2017, the economy grew at 1.7%. Their profit grew at 17.5%. So I said to my legal practice lady who comes and helps me type, she said, well, I'll tell you why. I had a tax query from SARS. They needed 5 years bank statements and 5 years bond. The 5-year bond statement is 1.5 pages. Standard Bank charged her 42 Rand for 60 months. Now, if we're going to rape the public the whole time, we're going to get nowhere.
Okay.
And the recipient of these, take fuel levies. That's a disastrous tax. I spoke to the chairman of one of the banks and mining houses, with Basil Hersov, I'll mention his name. I said, Basil, if I charged you 5 Rand fuel levy, what would you do? He said, I'll increase my price by 10 Rand. And those down the chain will increase it by another 50%. So the customer pays 15, and government got 5. So we sit not addressing the real issue. We are uncompetitive.
Okay. I think it's a point that's been spoken well about all sectors. I mean, people speak about it, whether you go to the grocery chains or you go to the mining houses or you go to the banks, as you say. Yeah, we've got some seriously big boys and we do need to bring in more competition. I'm not looking at you, Stavros.
No, well, I mean, let
you want to make a quick comment?
Let me make a quick comment. I'm not sure what the point was around pharmaceuticals, but what I can tell you,
it wasn't.
What I can tell you is a monthly supply of antiretrovirals in this country costs you 60 Rand to keep you alive, and that's about, so a 5-day supply is the equivalent of a bottle of water.
Sure.
So I think you need to put that in perspective. The real issue here is that our economy is not growing. you get economic growth and all the sins are forgiven, including a shrinking, narrowing tax base. That
Absolutely. We need to expand it. We need to grow it. Can I take some more questions? Yes, sir. Very quickly.
Right, thank you very much. I'm Antony Morrison with the Chamber of Agribusiness Ghana. I want to come from the area of skills development on the African continent. I chair the Agriculture Sector Skills Council of TVET Commission in Ghana. The last report I saw of the World Bank says that Africa imports between $10 to $15 billion annually of skills from area of telecommunication, pharmaceutical, extractive, oil and gas, agriculture, logistics. The list goes on and on and on. We have global giants here, and I want to find out, what are we doing to deepen skills on the African continent? We're talking about investment. 10 billion investment comes into oil and gas. 7 billion goes out from payment of high skills, people who are imported or skills that are imported. But we are not actually doing anything to deepen skills penetration among the youth. When it comes to area of business, we complain about the fact that the youth is not well equipped, technically skilled to handle some area of business development. Meanwhile, we are not doing business leadership. All the big companies, the CEOs are happy enjoying all the big. When it comes to the startups, the innovations, and all that is needed for the big companies to get some grinding, they stay away from them. So I want to find out, what are we doing? The population in Africa on youth is growing. We seem to be paying lip services to skills development. And I think that if investment from Europe or whatever part of the world into Africa is to be meaningful, Africa's skills must come of age. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. To be fair, though, so I've had the opportunity to be in a room where Google made a presentation and Microsoft also spoke about what they're doing on the continent. And those two companies alone, in terms of skills development that you are referring to, they've got large programs that they are rolling out. I can't give you the exact detail of it, but I think it's well worth looking. But I think from a government perspective, when we look across the continent, you can certainly see efforts are being made. Is it coordinated? Perhaps not. I don't know where that conversation begins, but I've got some very erudite people here. Mr. Nen.
I think it's the magnitude of the problem or the challenge that actually at times seems like not much is being done.
Yes.
Because the challenge of skills is huge. But also I think the other challenge that we are confronted with is in trying to address the issue of skills. We have come up at times with solutions that provide the skills that are not necessarily what is required by the economy. And this is a moving target, if I were to say so, because as we build the skills in a particular area, technology moves, all other areas in terms of factors of production change, and it is important to try and adapt and to keep up with that. But I think you make a very important point, and it is something that we do need to pay particular attention to, in addition to what some of those companies are doing. And there are quite a lot of other...
and even here, I think the government has got the HES program, and I think we've all heard about it, and we've seen some of the absorption rates are not the best that they can be, but the scale is huge. I remember listening to, I think it's a World Bank study saying you've got 12 million kids that are getting into the African job market every single year, and just 3 million are finding formal jobs. The rest, they're going somewhere, and they need to be catered for.